Do you guys know what The Hague is? It's the funny place that YouTubers say they'll be tried at after they joke about doing war crimes in the video games you watch their Let's Plays of. Recently, South Africa has brought a charge of genocide to Israel, and as a consequence of this, Israel has had to actually sit down and defend itself to the world on the charge that it may or may not be slightly, just a little bit, possibly slaughtering enormous numbers of Palestinian civilians. This has led to much discourse, some of which we're about to look at. You can see how things are going from the Israeli side by looking at this wonderful tweet thread that came out yesterday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this evening. Citizens of Israel, today we mark 100 days of the war. 100 days since the terrible day on which our citizens were massacred and taken hostage. We are continuing the war until the end, until total victory, until we achieve all our goals, eliminating Hamas, returning all our hostages, and ensuring Gaza will never again constitute a threat to Israel. We will restore security to both the South and the North. Nobody will stop us. Not The Hague, not the Axis of Evil, and not anyone else. So reaching the point in the war crime tribunal where we start speaking like an anime villain. This is just anime villain speech. The hypocritical onslaught at The Hague against the state of the Jews that arose from the ashes of the Holocaust at the behest of those who came to perpetrate another Holocaust against the Jews, that's what Hamas did, I guess, is a moral low point in the history of nations. In the murder tunnels of Gaza, tunnels they built, by the way, remember? Remember? We learned that? They were like, hey, under this hospital, there's like Gaza murder tunnels. And then they built them, actually, when they controlled Gaza before. Our forces have found copies of Hitler's Mein Kampf. In a home in Gaza, they found a child's tablet with a picture of Hitler as the screensaver. Remember that, folks? Remember? In that war-torn, dusty rubble, the perfectly clean, charged iPad that, as the front photo, had a portrait of Hitler? I remember. Not for nothing did German Chancellor Scholz, after viewing the atrocities of the October 7th massacre, say, Hamas are the new Nazis. Community note. Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany never said that. The sentence was said by Benjamin Netanyahu when Scholz visited Israel following the 7th of October attacks. Again, Prime Minister of Israel. So that's the level the discourse is on right now. Again, I genuinely think that the Zionists are more incompetent at propaganda than the Russians by far. I do genuinely believe that. You know, the Russians at least were successful in ingraining campism in the minds of Western leftists for generations. Israel makes everyone hate them every time they open their mouths. It's remarkable. It goes on like this for quite a while. It's unbelievable how bad it is. No, it is genuinely. Again, another, for all their failures, Israel dishing out a critical blow against Nazi rhetoric. The Nazis based their Jewish question conspiracy theory on the idea that, Jews are good at deceit and beguiling Western nations. And yet here we have Israel, the so-called nation of Jews, being so horrible at defending themselves that they're actually negatively polarizing millions of people against them. And every time they open their mouths, they sound like the most uncredible pieces of shit imaginable. So there you go, Nazis defeated yet again, once before in 45 and now in 23. From the United Nations YouTube account. What a wonderful world we live in. Let's get a quick vibe check in the room, shall we? Okay, black screen doesn't stay for long. What are the vibes here at the International Court of Justice? We've got the classic chain and dinner jacket look, a perfect blend of men's formal and streetwear, like that, When you have a function at The Hague, but you don't want to forget where you came from. A vibe check on the judges. Oh, this person has to be blocked because they're a beta. But I've gotten around it with a sneaky use of a tool that only I know how to use called incog. Feel like you never want to see one of the judges at the International Court of Justice doing this while you testify? I like that. I like that. That's good. Looking good. God, it's so LARPy. It's the International Court of Justice. I feel like it's not LARPy for them to be all formal. You know, I think that's okay, actually. Feels like an appropriate, you know. Why is it so blurry? Because justice is blind. Ooh, they liked that one. Hi.
Please be seated.
I was already seated, anticipating their moves and acting.
The sitting is open. The court meets today and will meet tomorrow under Article 74, Paragraph 3 of the Rules of Court to hear the oral observations of the parties on the request for the indication of provisional measures.
Now, to be clear, watching the entirety of these proceedings would be quite long and in many cases quite boring. So we're vibe checking this to begin with, and then we're going to look at the opening presentations from both Israel and South Africa, getting an initial vibe check. This won't be the only time we cover this. I've been waiting a little bit to see the extent to which it develops. Now, I want to temper people's expectations right off the beginning, okay? A lot of attention is being paid to this case in some political sectors. Others are ignoring it entirely. 610 Volts asks the critical question, what can The Hague even do? And that is what matters, right? I mean, you can condemn Israel all you like, but the real material consequence of this is, you know, like, what would the ruling entail? What's really on trial here is international reputation. This is my hopium guess. This is my optimistic guess, okay? Most every country in the world doesn't like Israel, including the United States and Western Europe. They support Israel in part for a very complicated connection of geopolitical reasons, largely the fact that it exists as a kind of wedge against Iran's regions and the or influence in the region and some other stuff. And also, I think in large part because there's a lot of inertia. You know, there has been so much cultural capital expended on the historical defense of Israel in the region that to whiplash against that and to condemn Israel would be controversial to a lot of liberals who aren't even particularly anti-Palestinian. Keep in mind that while there are many ambient Zionists in the West, not all of them are crazy evangelicals looking for the rapture or like super anti-Arab Jewish supremacists or whatever. Those are minorities by far. For the most part, people's support of Israel is just that tepid, they're the democracy of the Middle East, the Holocaust happened and that was bad, you know, they should be safe, that kind of stuff, you know? It's not a very strong ideological commitment. Now, in a democracy, it's generally a bad idea to do things that make you unpopular if you want to win re-election. So I think this is one of the main reasons we've seen such tepid behavior on the part of Biden's administration and the whole of Western Europe, you know? There's a hesitance. How do you deal with Israel in a way that doesn't blow up the Middle East and also, you know, blow up your own electorate, right? How do you manage that? I think the best case scenario is that a ruling against Israel in the International Court of Justice could potentially serve to legitimize the case against Israel in a way that gives Western nations more leeway in condemning their behavior. Essentially, now they can point to the ruling, if it goes the way we would want it to, as a kind of impartial arbitrator or something to gesture at and go like, okay, well, you know, we were on their side, but this looks pretty bad. It's a rallying point, essentially. It's a trendsetter. That's my hope. It's also possible this does nothing, even if they rule against Israel, which is not guaranteed. Though I feel like they might, I suppose. It's hard to say. It's really, really hard to say. Do you all understand what I'm saying here? Like what I think is on the table? Okay. a little abstract. The court itself can't like stop Israel. It's about setting a trend. It's about establishing a precedent. South Africa has a pretty good case, according to many lawyers I've seen cover it. We're going to see ourselves. I want to get a few more minutes of vibe check before we go straight to the opening statements, though.
Submitted by the Republic of South Africa in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel.
An ICJ ruling will be referred to in future ICC cases that target individuals involved. You're completely correct. That's right. Yes, it can be used as precedent. After all, folks, we don't just want Netanyahu to stop, do we? No, no, no. We also want him to stand for his crimes. And a ruling against Israel on this matter will implicate the people who committed the genocide, allowing them to, a strong precedent to point to. Difficult, after all, to accuse Israel of committing a genocide, but not also to accuse the people who actually, did the genocide. It's pretty tough to do that. Now, will that actually happen? Very unlikely, in my opinion. A direct condemnation of Israel is one thing. Going after Netanyahu, that's a spicy meatball. We'll see.
The court does not include upon the bench a judge of the nationality of either party. Accordingly, both parties avail themselves of the right under Article 31, Paragraph 3 of the statute to choose a judge ad hoc. South Africa has chosen Judge Dikgang Ernest Moseneke, and Israel, Judge Aharon Barak. Article 20 of the statute provides that every member of the court shall, before taking up his duties, make a solemn declaration in open court that he will exercise his powers impartially and conscientiously. Pursuant to Article 31, Paragraph 6 of the statute, that same provision applies to judges ad hoc.
Israel is just going to call the International Criminal, or the actual International Court of Justice anti-Semitic. They already have. Oh, another benefit to this is that, as we saw with that Twitter thread, this is going to make Israel and Zionists act insane. I've already seen a few loud Zionists on Twitter talk about how they're now going to boycott South Africa or whatever. Oh, we saw that great clip from Fetterman where he said something like, yeah, well, you really think South Africa should be talking about genocide or something? Like, I have no idea what he was implying, but then he went on to clarify it, and he said, well, I think South Africa has more important things to talk about, focus on than Israel or something. Some unironically extremely racist statement. Like, I don't know if he's implying the like white Boer farmers are getting slaughtered by black people, or if he's implying that like black people shouldn't speak on this because it's actually like very racist. I have no idea. What did he mean by this? Scholars debate this to this day.
Before inviting Judge Moseneke and
he
Judge
did this
Barak
shithole country
to make
shit.
their solemn declarations, I shall first, in accordance with custom, say a few words about their careers and qualifications. Judge Dikgang Ernest Moseneke, of South African nationality, has had a distinguished career as a judge, law practitioner, and academic. After obtaining degrees in English, political science, and law from the University of South Africa, he practiced as an attorney and an advocate with the Pretoria Bar. In 2001, he was appointed a judge on the High Court in Pretoria, and a year later, he became a judge on the Constitutional Court of South Africa, where he was Deputy Chief Justice for more than a decade and Acting Chief Justice in 2013 and 2014. Judge Moseneke is also an honorary professor in the Department of Jurisprudence at the University of Pretoria and has served as a Chancellor of the Pretoria Technikon and the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Judge Moseneke has received numerous honorary doctorates and awards. I shall now say a few words about the career and qualifications of Judge Barak. Judge Aharon Barak, of Israeli nationality, has had an eminent career as a judge and law professor. He holds a PhD in law from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and served as the dean of the Faculty of Law of that university between 1974 and 1975. He was appointed to the Israeli Supreme Court in 1978 and served as its president from 1995 to 2006. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, Judge Barak served as the Attorney General of the State of Israel between 1945 1975, and 1978. He has taught law in a number of law schools, including Yale University, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the Reichman University in Herzliya, Israel. Judge Barak has also written extensively.
Reminder that for a time it was considered for I'm blanking on his name, the pedophile and friend of Epstein, Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, the guy who was credibly accused of a 15-year-old girl multiple times, and in response said, "All the feminists who are accusing me of this, how do you feel about Hamas? How do you feel about what Hamas did? You're all fine with Hamas girls, huh? Well, yeah, like literally." They didn't go with him, but I think they should have, because I think that would have been a more honest representation of what they're going for, you know? I think that would have been like a, like a very direct expression of their feelings on this whole situation.
In law, and has received numerous honorary degrees and awards. In accordance with the order of precedence fixed by Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the Rules of Court, I shall first invite Judge Moseneke to make the solemn declaration prescribed by the statute, and I request all those present to rise.
Stand up, everyone. Stand up in your chairs. If you're laying in bed, you got to stand up. Otherwise, you're being disrespectful.
Judge Moseneke, you have the floor.
I solemnly declare that I will perform my duties and exercise my powers as a judge honorably, faithfully, impartially, and conscientiously.
I thank Judge Moseneke, and I now invite Judge Barak to make the solemn declaration prescribed by the statute. Judge Barak, you have the floor.
I solemnly declare that I will perform my duties and exercise my powers as judge honorably, faithfully, impartially, and consciously.
I thank you, Judge Barak. Please be seated. I take note of the solemn declarations made by Judge Ad hoc Moseneke and Judge Ad hoc Barak, and I declare them duly
Which one represents Israel? Those were judges.
Installed as judges ad hoc in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. I shall now recall the principal steps of the procedure in the present case. On 29 December 2023, the government of South Africa filed in the registry of the court an application instituting proceedings against the State of Israel, alleging violations by the latter of its obligations under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. I shall refer to this convention as the Genocide Convention. To found the jurisdiction of the court, South Africa invokes Article 36, Paragraph 1 of the...
Watch Israel just not recognize the ICJ anymore after being found guilty. Actually, that is interesting in and of itself, because Israel has a history of ignoring international tribunals. So the pressure, the heat is on Israel enough that they actually are responding to this one. They typically ignore these. It's not the first time. I think it's a good sign that they even felt the need to show up, to be honest.
The Statute of Court and Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. South Africa states that its applications concerns acts threatened, adopted, condoned, taken, and being taken by the government and military of Israel against the Palestinian people, a distinct national, racial, and ethnical group, in the wake of the attacks in Israel on 7 October 2023. South Africa contends...
Thank you for an example. Israel's separation wall endures 15 years after ICJ ruling. And this article is from 2019, so it would have been ruling, what, in 2004? Yeah, they have previously just flat out ignored these, though obviously the heat is on a lot more this time, like a lot more.
That the acts and omissions by Israel of which it complains are genocidal in character because, I quote, they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group, that being the part of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip, end of quote. South Africa asserts that the relevant acts are attributable to Israel, which has failed to prevent genocide and is committing genocide, and which has also violated and continues to violate other fundamental obligations under the Genocide Convention. The application contains a request for the indication of provisional measures pursuant to Article 41 of the Statute of Court and Articles 73, 74, and 75 of the Rules of Court. According to South Africa, I quote, "Provisional measures are necessary in this case to protect against further severe and irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinian people under the Genocide Convention, which
A lot of people are asking me questions, okay? We can't pause this every 2 seconds. You might just have to, you might just have to sit in your hands a bit here. I will say this, though. South Africa has also warned the Biden administration that they intend to sue the U.S. for its support of Israel through this. I don't know whether or not that's actually going to happen, but if they bring America to the ICJ, I support them uncritically, fully, with no reservations whatsoever. There are potentially real consequences to this, but this is a significant historical gravitas, so let's watch.
Continue to be violated with impunity. South Africa requests that the court indicate provisional measures to protect and preserve those rights, as well as its own rights under the Convention, and to prevent any aggravation or extension of the dispute pending the determination of the merits of the issues raised by the application." End of quote. The registrar will now read out the passage from the request specifying the provisional measures which the government of South Africa is asking the court to indicate. You have the floor, Mr. Registrar.
Thank you, Madam President. I quote, 1. The State of Israel shall immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. 2. The State of Israel shall ensure that any military or irregular armed units which may be directed, supported, or influenced by it, as well as any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, take no steps in furtherance of the military operation referred to point 1 above. 3. The Republic of South Africa and the State of Israel shall each, in accordance with their obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinian people, take all reasonable measures within their power to prevent genocide. 4. The State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, in relation to the Palestinian people as a group protected by the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, desist from the commission of any and all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, a. Killing members of the group, b. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, c. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in all or in part, and d. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5. The State of Israel shall, pursuant to point...
So for those of you who aren't paying attention, because I suppose I should keep the Zoomers up on this, right now we're listening to the 9 provisional measures of protection that have been requested by South Africa of Israel. It's a term used in the International Court of Justice that sort of parallels preliminary systems. Basically, do this. It's you do this. It's the do this argument. Now, I'll remind all of you on my talking points on this matter because, you know, I've only talked about this a few hundred times, but just to catch you all up, the term genocide is incredibly nebulous and often very unhelpful. Different definitions can lead you in different directions when it comes to what it means or like what it implies. Sometimes many people die in a way that is not genocidal. Usually what we're focusing on is an intent to eliminate a population either through its entire destruction, its significant but partial destruction, or an effort to make conditions there so unlivable that it serves to entail a destruction of life in itself. Now, my argument would be that Israel has not engaged in a genocide against Palestinians purely as a product of its killing. Killing 25,000 civilians is monstrous, but not in and of itself genocidal. It is a combination of factors which produce this. The fact that they live in an open-air concentration camp, the fact that they're not allowed to leave, the fact that They are denied access to resources, to their own water, to their ability to elevate themselves. They're essentially kept in a camp and killed at the leisure of the state of Israel. There are a combination of factors here. The current war, I think, in large part, very clearly indicates an eliminationist desire, not just because, like, every member of Israel's government is screaming for it, but also because where are all these Palestinians supposed to live? Their homes have been vaporized. Where do they go after all this? It seems like the only way they could continue to exist is to escape to another country. And this, I think, entails, an effort to bring about the destruction of life in whole or in part. Remember, that is one of the definitions of genocide in the United Nations, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And I think that what's happening right now easily meets those criteria. Obviously, stuff like this is always like a kind of definitional game. So, you can say, oh, well, the population of the Palestinians has gone up in the past few years. And then you could counter-argue and say, well, you could say the same of people in a prison camp. That doesn't change the conditions meant to destroy life. It also doesn't reflect a shift in their population, which has taken place since October 7th. What do you think is going to happen to their population like now? There are many arguments to be made, but I agree, obviously, with South Africa in this case. If nothing else, like the cutting off water to an entire ethnic group that you've kept in a camp, I think, should qualify in and of itself.
4C above, in relation to Palestinians, desist from and take all measures within its power, including the rescinding of relevant orders, of restrictions and/or of prohibitions to prevent a. the expulsion and forced displacement from their homes, b. the deprivation of b1. access to adequate food and water, b2. access to humanitarian assistance, including access to adequate fuel, shelter, clothes, hygiene and sanitation, b3. medical supplies and assistance, and c. the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza. 6. The State of Israel shall, in relations to Palestinians, ensure that its military, as well as any irregular armed units or individuals which may be directed, supported or otherwise influenced by it, and any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction or influence, do not commit any acts described in 4 and 5 above, or engage in direct and public incitement to commit genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, or complicity in genocide. And insofar as they do engage therein, that steps are taken towards their punishment pursuant to Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Convention.
If anyone's interested in pursuing this with some sort of studious intent, you can follow along, because everything he's reading right now is actually on Wikipedia. The 9 provisional measures of protection are listed right here on the South Africa versus Israel Genocide Convention Wikipedia page. You can follow along and understand what's being said fully.
The prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. 7. The State of Israel shall take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. To that end, the State of Israel shall not act to deny or otherwise to restrict access by fact-finding missions, international mandates and other bodies to Gaza to assist in ensuring the preservation and retention of said evidence. 8. The State of Israel shall submit a report to the Court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 week, as from the date of this order, and thereafter at such regular intervals as the Court shall order, until a final decision on the case is rendered by the Court. 9. The State of Israel shall refrain from any action and shall ensure that no action is taken which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the Court or make it more difficult to resolve. End of quote.
I thank the Registrar. Immediately after the application containing the request for the indication of provisional measures was filed, the Deputy Registrar transmitted an original copy thereof to the Government of Israel. He also notified the Secretary General of the United Nations. According to Article 74, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Court, a request for the indication of provisional measures shall have priority over all other cases. Paragraph 2 of the same article states that the Court shall proceed to a decision on the request as a matter of urgency. This imperative must, however, be balanced with the need to fix a date of oral proceedings in such a way as to afford the parties an opportunity to be represented at the hearings. Consequently, the parties were informed that the date for the opening of the oral proceedings, during which they could present their observations on the request for the indication of provisional measures, had been fixed for Thursday, 11 January 2024 at 10 a.m. I would now like to welcome the delegations of South Africa and Israel, and I note the presence before the Court of the agents and counsel of both parties. This morning, the Court will hear the single round of oral argument of South Africa, which has submitted the request for the indication of provisional measures. It will hear Israel tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. For purposes of this single round of oral argument, each party will have available to it a 3-hour sitting. In this first sitting, South Africa may, if required, avail itself of a short extension beyond 1 p.m. today in view of the time taken up by these introductory remarks. Before I give the floor to the agent of South Africa, I wish to draw the party's attention to Practice Direction 11, which states as follows, I quote, "In oral proceedings on the request for the indication of provisional measures, parties should limit themselves to what is relevant to the criteria for the indication of provisional measures as stipulated in the statute, rules, and jurisprudence of the Court. They should not enter into the merits of the case beyond what is strictly necessary for that purpose." End of quote. I now give the floor to the agent of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Vusumuzi Madonsela. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Court, it is an honor and a privilege for me to appear before you today on behalf of the Republic of South Africa. I wish to express my gratitude to the Court for convening this
How's his fit, Vosh? Excellent.
hearing on the earliest possible date to entertain South Africa's request for the indication of provisional measures in this matter. In our application, South Africa has recognized the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinian people through Israel's colonization since 1948, which has systematically and forcibly dispossessed, displaced, and fragmented the Palestinian people, deliberately denying them their internationally recognized inalienable right to self-determination and their internationally recognized right of return as refugees to their towns and villages in what is now the State of Israel. We are also particularly mindful of Israel's institutionalized regime of discriminatory laws, policies and practices designed and maintained to establish domination, subjecting the Palestinian people to apartheid on both sides of the Green Line. Decades-long impunity for widespread and systematic human rights violations has emboldened Israel in its recurrence and intensification of international crimes in Palestine. At the outset, South Africa acknowledges that the genocidal acts and omissions by the State of Israel inevitably form part of a continuum of illegal acts perpetrated against the Palestinian people since 1948. The application places Israel's genocidal acts and omissions within the broader context of Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation, and 16-year siege imposed on the Gaza Strip, a siege which itself has been described by the Director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza as a silent killer of people. As the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination warned on December 21st, hate speech and dehumanizing discourse targeted at Palestinians is raising severe concerns regarding Israel and other states' parties' obligation to prevent crimes against humanity and genocide in the Gaza Strip. This warning has been followed by a succession of warnings, including by 37 United Nations special rapporteurs, of the failure of the international system to mobilize to prevent genocide in Gaza. Today, we are joined in court by representatives of the Palestinian state, the Palestinians who work in the fields of human rights, including residents of Gaza who were in Gaza just a few days ago. They are some of the lucky ones who managed to get out of Gaza. Their future and the future of their fellow Palestinians who are still in Gaza depend on the decision this court will make on this matter. With the leave of the court, I now call upon His Excellency, Mr. Ronald Lamola, Minister of Justice of the Republic of South Africa, to make South Africa's substantive opening remarks.
I thank the agent of South Africa for his statement, and I now invite the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services for the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Ronald Lamola, to take the floor. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Madam President, and distinguished members of the court.
Also immaculate, in case you were wondering.
It is an honor for me to stand here in front of you on behalf of the Republic of South Africa on this exceptional case. In extending our hands across the miles to the people of Palestine, we do so in full knowledge that we are part of a humanity that is at one. These were the words of our founding president, Nelson Mandela. This is the spirit in which South Africa acceded to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide in 1998. This is the spirit in which we approach this court as a contracting party to the Convention. This is a commitment we owe to the people of Palestine and Israelis alike. As previously mentioned, the violence and the destruction in Palestine and Israel did not begin on the 7th of October 2023. The Palestinians have experienced systematic oppression and violence for the last 76 years. On 6 October 2023 and every day since October the 7th, 2023. In the Gaza Strip, at least since 2004, Israel continues to exercise control over the airspace, territorial waters, land crossing, water, electricity, and civilian infrastructure, as well as over key government functions. Entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is strictly prohibited, with Israel operating the only two crossing points. Given that continuing effective control by Israel and over the territory of Gaza, Israel is still considered by international community to be under belligerent occupation by Israel. South Africa unequivocally condemned the targeting of civilians by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups and the taking of hostages on the 7th of October 2023. And has again expressly recorded this condemnation, mostly recently in its note verbal to Israel on the 21st of December 2023. That said, no armed attack on a state territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can provide any justification for or defense to breaches to the Convention, whether as a matter of law or morality. Israel's response to the 7th of October 2023 attack has crossed this line and give rise to the breaches of the Convention. Faced with such evidence and our duty to do what we can do to prevent genocide, as contained in Article 1.
Good arguments so far. To clarify, these aren't the legal arguments. These are opening statements being made by South Africa's legal team. The actual legal arguments will be levied by, have it down here, Tembeka, I'm going to push this, Nkuka Itobi, I believe. The actual proper legal arguments. They're setting the stage right now.
The Convention the South African government initiated this case. South Africa welcomes the fact that Israel has engaged with the case in order to have the matter resolved by the court, after careful and objective consideration of the facts and submission put before it, as the parties to the convention have intended. This hearing is concerned with South Africa's request to the court for the indication of provisional measures and will necessarily have a narrow and particular focus. I invoke the words of Martin Luther King when he said, "The arch of the moral of the universe is long, always bending towards justice." South Africa's case will be presented by a team of 6 legal counsels, comprising of Dr. Adila Hasim, Mr. Tembeka Nzukaitobi, Professor John Dugat, Ms. Blim Leckrone, Mr. Max du Preez, and Professor Vagan Low. Dr. Adila Hasim, Senior Counsel, will provide an overview of the risk of genocidal acts in the perpetual vulnerability to acts of genocide. Mr. Tembeka Nzukaitobi, Senior Counsel, will examine Israel's alleged genocidal intent. Professor John Dugat, Senior Counsel, will focus on the prima facie jurisdiction. Professor Max du Plessis, Senior Counsel, will discuss the various rights currently under threat. Blinny Crowell, King's Counsel, will present the argument of agency and potential irreparable harm. And Professor Vagan Low, King's Counsel, will speak on the provisional measures. I now request, Madam President, the court to call on Dr. Hasim. I thank you.
His Excellency, Mr. Lamola, and I now invite Ms. Adila Hasim to address the court. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is a privilege to appear on behalf of the Republic of South Africa in this case of exceptional importance. It's a case that underscores the very essence of our shared humanity as expressed in the preamble to the Genocide Convention. It's my task to address the court on the genocidal acts that have led to this urgent request for provisional measures under Article 41 of the Statute of the Court. South Africa contends that Israel has transgressed Article 2 of the Convention by committing actions that fall within the definition of genocide. The actions show a systematic pattern of conduct from which genocide can be inferred. Allow me to place these acts in context. Gaza is one of the 2 constituent territories of the occupied Palestinian territories, occupied by Israel since 1967. It is a narrow strip of approximately 365 square kilometers, as depicted in the map now displayed. Israel continues to exercise control over the space, territorial waters, land crossings, water, electricity, electromagnetic sphere, and civilian infrastructure in Gaza, as well as over key governmental functions. As the Honourable Minister has said, entry and exit by air and sea to Gaza is prohibited, with Israel operating the only 2 crossing points. Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places in the world, is home to approximately 2.3 million Palestinians, almost half of them children. For the past 96 days, Israel has subjected Gaza to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare. Palestinians in Gaza are being killed by Israeli weaponry and bombs from air, land, and sea. They are also at immediate risk of death by starvation, dehydration, and disease as a result of the ongoing siege by Israel, the destruction of Palestinian towns, the insufficient aid being allowed through to the Palestinian population, and the impossibility of distributing this limited aid while bombs fall.
Remember that IDF propaganda where soldiers were carrying like these boxes that seemed to weigh 2 ounces that had like food and medicine written on them in crayon in English, like in big letters facing the camera, you know? I remember those.
This conduct renders essentials to life unobtainable. At this provisional measures stage, as this court has made clear in the Gambia-Myanmar case, it is not necessary for the court to come to a final view on the question of whether Israel's conduct constitutes genocide. It is necessary to establish only whether at least some of the acts alleged are capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention.
Okay, interesting. This is referring to a previous ICJ ruling in the Gambia versus Myanmar, which was in 2019. I don't know much about this. I'm going to quickly look over it while she speaks and give you my feelings on it after I feel like I know enough to say anything, which I currently don't.
On analyzing the specific and ongoing genocidal acts complained of, it is clear that at least some, if not all of these acts, fall within the Convention's provisions. These acts are documented in detail in South Africa's application and confirmed by reliable, often UN sources. It's thus unnecessary and impossible for me to recount all of them. I will highlight only some in order to illustrate the pattern of genocidal conduct. The UN statistics that are relied upon are up to date as of 9 January 2024. In South Africa's oral submissions, we will illustrate the facts that we rely on with limited use of audiovisual material. Madam President, we do so with restraint and only where necessary, and always with respect to the Palestinian people.
Unironically, people in chat are going to start catching bans if you keep being annoying. Behave.
Against this background, I move now to demonstrate, in turn, how Israel's conduct violates Articles 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D of the Convention. The first genocidal act committed by Israel is the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, in violation of Article 2A of the Genocide Convention. As the UN Secretary General explained 5 weeks ago, the level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I stand before you today, 23,210 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces during the sustained attacks over the last 3 months, at least 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. Some 7,000 Palestinians are still missing, presumed dead under the rubble. Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to relentless bombing wherever they go. They are killed in their homes, in places where they seek shelter, in hospitals, in schools, in mosques, in churches, and as they try to find food and water for their families. They have been killed if they failed to evacuate. In the places to which they have fled, and even while they attempted to flee along Israeli-declared safe routes. The level of killing is so extensive that those whose bodies are found are buried in mass graves, often unidentified. In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available. They are dropped by lethal fighter jets that are used to strike targets on the ground by one of the world's most resourced armies. Israel has killed an unparalleled and unprecedented number of civilians, with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take. More than 1,800 families, Palestinian families in Gaza, have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of multi-generational families have been wiped out, with no remaining survivors. Mothers, fathers, children, siblings, grandparents, aunts, cousins, often all killed together. This killing is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. It is inflicted deliberately. No one is spared, not even newborn babies. The scale of Palestinian child killings in Gaza is such that UN chiefs have described it as a graveyard for children. The devastation, we submit, is intended to and has laid waste to Gaza beyond any acceptable legal, let alone humane, justification. The second genocidal act identified in South Africa's application is Israel's infliction of serious bodily or mental harm to Palestinians in Gaza in violation of Article 2b of the Genocide Convention. Israel's attacks have left close to 60,000 Palestinians wounded and maimed. Again, the majority of them women and children. This in circumstances where the healthcare system has all but collapsed. I return to this later in my speech. Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, are arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress, and loaded onto trucks taken to unknown locations. The suffering of the Palestinian people, physical and mental, is undeniable. Turning to the third genocidal act under Article 2c, Israel has deliberately imposed conditions on Gaza that cannot sustain life and are calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Israel achieves this in at least 4 ways. First, by displacement. Israel has forced the displacement of about 85% of Palestinians in Gaza. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have either been killed or at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. Many Palestinians have been displaced multiple times as families are forced to move repeatedly in search of safety. Israel's first evacuation order on 13 October required the evacuation of over 1 million people, including children, the elderly, the wounded, and infirm. Entire hospitals were required to evacuate even newborn babies in intensive care. The order required them to evacuate the north to the south within 24 hours. The order itself was genocidal. It required immediate movement, taking only what could be carried, while no humanitarian assistance was permitted, and fuel, water, and food, and other necessities of life had deliberately been cut off. It was clearly calculated to bring about the destruction of the population. For many Palestinians, the forced evacuation from their homes is inevitably permanent. Israel has now damaged or destroyed an estimated 355,000 Palestinian homes, leaving at least 500,000 Palestinians with no home to return to. The Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons explains that houses and infrastructure, I quote, have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of mass forced displacement of Palestinians by Israel. There is no indication at all that Israel accepts responsibility for rebuilding what it has destroyed. Instead, the destruction is celebrated by the Israeli army. Soldiers film themselves joyfully detonating entire apartment blocks and town squares, erecting the Israeli flag over the wreckage, seeking to re-establish Israeli settlements on the rubble of Palestinian homes, and thus extinguishing the very basis of Palestinian life in Gaza.
If Israel ends up losing this case in part because of poor soldier discipline, meaning IDF TikTok was just giving like evidence over to South Africa, that would be incredibly funny. Like literally just like being some random IDF dipshit fascist and knowing that your video brought the condemnation.
Second, together with the forced displacement, Israel's conduct has been deliberately calculated to cause widespread hunger, dehydration, and starvation. Israel's campaign has pushed Gazans to the brink of famine. An unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger. Of all the people in the world currently suffering catastrophic hunger, more than 80% are in Gaza. The situation is such that the experts are now predicting that more Palestinians in Gaza may die from starvation and disease than airstrikes. And yet Israel continues to impede the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, not only refusing to allow sufficient aid in, but removing the ability to distribute it through constant bombardment and obstruction. Just 3 days ago, on 8 January, a planned mission by UN agencies to deliver urgent medical supplies and vital fuel to a hospital and medical supply center was denied by Israeli authorities. This marked the 5th denial of a mission to the center since 26 December, leaving 5 hospitals in northern Gaza without access to life-saving medical supplies and equipment. Aid trucks that are allowed in are seized upon by the hungry. What is provided is simply not enough. President, members of the court, this is an image of an aid truck arriving in Gaza. Third, Israel has deliberately inflicted conditions in which Palestinians in Gaza are denied adequate shelter, clothes, or sanitation. For weeks, there have been acute shortages of clothes, bedding, blankets, and critical non-food items. Clean water is all but gone, leaving far below the amount required to safely drink, clean, and cook. Accordingly, the WHO has stated that Gaza is experiencing soaring rates of infectious disease outbreaks. Cases of diarrhea in children under 5 years of age have increased 2,000% since hostilities began. When combined and left untreated, malnutrition and disease create a deadly cycle. The fourth genocidal act under Article 2B is Israel's military assault on Gaza's healthcare system, which renders life unsustainable. Even by 7 December, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health noted that the healthcare infrastructure in the Gaza Strip has been completely obliterated. Those wounded by Israel in Gaza are being deprived of life-saving medical care. Gaza's healthcare system, already crippled by years of blockade and prior attacks by Israel, is unable to cope with the sheer scale of the injuries. Finally, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has pointed to acts committed by Israel that would fall under the fourth category of genocidal acts in Article 2D of the Convention. On 22 November, she expressly warned the following: the reproductive violence inflicted by Israel on Palestinian women, newborn babies, infants, and children could be qualified as acts of genocide under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, including imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group. Israel is blocking the delivery of life-saving aid, including essential medical kits for delivering babies, in circumstances where an estimated 180 women are giving birth in Gaza each day. Of these 180 women, the WHO warns that 15% are likely to experience pregnancy or birth-related complications and need additional medical care. That care is simply not available. In sum, Madam President, all of these acts, individually and collectively, form a calculated pattern of conduct by Israel, indicating a genocidal intent. This intent is evident from Israel's conduct in specially targeting Palestinians living in Gaza, using weaponry that causes large-scale homicidal destruction, as well as targeted sniping of civilians, designating safe zones for Palestinians to seek refuge, and then bombing these, depriving Palestinians in Gaza of basic needs: food, water, healthcare, fuel, sanitation, and communications, destroying social infrastructure, homes, schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, and killing, seriously injuring, and leaving large numbers of children orphaned. Genocides are never declared in advance, but this court has the benefit of the past 13 weeks of evidence that shows incontrovertibly a pattern of conduct and related intention that justifies a plausible claim of genocidal acts. In the Gambia-Myanmar case, this court did not hesitate to impose provisional measures in relation to allegations that Myanmar was committing genocidal acts against the Rohingya within the Rakhine state.
The reason I looked that up was because I was interested on to what extent and on what grounds the court found Myanmar guilty, which they did. And I wasn't able to find much information. It seems like the incumbent in Myanmar at the time took on the defense as a way of boosting her popularity. She defended Myanmar against the accusation of genocide in a way which was itself extremely genocidal, like very like disingenuous, you know, like, oh, killing those Muslims, the Rohingya, why would we do that? Who even cares? Blah blah. Myanmar was found guilty, and the ICJ set forward conditions and provisions, but it seems like they haven't started to take effect until rather recently, and of course right now Myanmar is engaged in a civil war. The only good thing that I can say with regards to the treatment of the Rohingya is that it seems that the military has its hands full fighting the civil war right now and hasn't had that much time to slaughter Muslims on their western border. So it seems like, if nothing else, the rebels are keeping the military busy fighting targets that can actually shoot back.
The facts before the court today are sadly even more stark, and like the Gambia-Myanmar case, deserve and demand this court's intervention. Every day there is mounting irreparable loss of life, property, dignity, and humanity for the Palestinian people. Our news feeds show graphic images of suffering that has become unbearable to watch. Nothing will stop the suffering except an order from this court. Without an indication of provisional measures, the atrocities will continue, with the Israeli Defense Force indicating that it intends pursuing this course of action for at least a year. In the words of the UN Under-Secretary General on 5 January 2024, I quote, "You think getting aid into Gaza is easy? Think again. 3 layers of inspections before trucks can even enter. Confusion and long queues. A growing list of rejected items. A crossing point meant for pedestrians, not trucks. Another crossing point where trucks have been blocked by desperate, hungry communities. A destroyed commercial sector. Constant bombardments, poor communications, damaged roads, convoys shot at, delays at checkpoints, a traumatized and exhausted population crammed into a smaller and smaller sliver of land, shelters which have long exceeded their full capacity, aid workers themselves displaced, killed. This is an impossible situation for the people of Gaza and for those trying to help them. The fighting must stop." Close quote. Madam President, members of the court, that concludes my section on the genocidal conduct of Israel. I thank you for your patient attention, and I ask that you call Advocate Nkatobi to the podium to address the court on genocidal intent.
No clapping in the ICJ.
Asim, and I now invite Mr. Tembeke Nkatobi to address the court. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President and distinguished members of the court, it is a privilege to appear before the court on behalf of South Africa. I will address Israel's genocidal intent. At this stage, the court is not required to determine that the only inference to be drawn from the available evidence is genocidal to order provisional measures, as that is to decide the merits. Rather, the assessment of the existence of an intent to destroy could be made by the court only at the stage of the examination of the merits. That some of the alleged acts may also amount to atrocities other than genocide does not exclude the finding of plausible acts of genocide. Madam President, South Africa is not alone in drawing attention to Israel's genocidal rhetoric against Palestinians in Gaza. 15 United Nations special rapporteurs and 21 members of the United Nations working groups have warned that what is happening in Gaza reflects a genocide in the making and an overt intent to destroy the Palestinian people under occupation. Israel has a genocidal intent against the Palestinians in Gaza. That is evident from the way...
This guy's quite young, given his position, and I went onto his Wikipedia page to see if I could learn anything interesting, and I thought this was quite funny because you don't usually get this juxtaposition, but his Wikipedia profile picture has him dressed down quite a bit compared to what he's wearing here. It's very funny. This is from 2019, so it's like, normally, just living his day to day, and then he locks in for the ICJ case, it's just funny, I guess, that juxtaposition, because I guess people who dress this officiously, I just sort of imagine them going to sleep and taking a shower in like 60 layers of robes. He gained silk status in February 2020. Silk status, the title of senior counsel given to a senior lawyer in some countries that were formerly a part of the British Empire. He's 47. Wow, this guy's going places. That is a remarkable amount of renown for somebody in their 40s. That woman was also quite young, no? Yes, yes, I didn't look at her Wikipedia page. But yeah, no, she also was quite young, yeah.
The way in which Israel's military attack is being conducted, which has been described by Ms. Hassim SC. It is systematic in its character and form. The mass displacement of the population of Gaza, headed into areas where they continue to be killed, and the deliberate creation of conditions that, quote, lead to a slow death, unquote. There is also the clear pattern of conduct, the targeting of family homes and civilian infrastructure, laying waste to vast areas of Gaza, and the bombing, shelling, and sniping of men, women, and children where they stand, the destruction of the health infrastructure, and lack of access to humanitarian assistance. So much so that as we stand today, 1% of the Palestinian population in Gaza has been systematically decimated, and 1 in 4 Gazans have been injured since 7 October. These two elements alone are capable of evidencing Israel's genocidal intent in relation to the whole or part of the Palestinian population in Gaza.
Keep in mind that all of this has happened in only a few months, too. Usually when we look at timelines of genocides, ethnic displacements, or mass killings, it's usually something like a historical event we look back over the course of years, like there's a period of time during which it takes place. We're looking at this happening like in an incredibly short time, and it's also being done with an unprecedented amount of international scrutiny, meaning that, as I've said before, and I firmly believe this, if it wasn't for the rest of the world keeping their eye on Israel, Israel would have already bulldozed the entirety of the Gaza Strip and probably killed a majority of the Palestinians there. It's only the fear of international condemnation and everything it entails that prevents them from acting with all of the haste they are capable of.
However, third, there is an extraordinary feature in this case, that Israel's political leaders military commanders, and persons holding official positions have systematically and in explicit terms.
I always thought the liberal line, "Don't you think they could do it if they wanted," was pretty dumb. Yeah, that line could literally be applied to the Holocaust. The Holocaust took place over multiple years, you know? Like, people were put in ghettos at first and then rounded up bit by bit. Like, the idea, like, oh, well, couldn't they have just done it in a couple months if they wanted to? I guess they could have hastened it. You're right, you know? Go make that argument, you know? It's an insane argument to make.
Declared their genocidal intent. And these statements are then repeated by soldiers on the ground in Gaza.
Henrigel, we're not talking about South Africa's behavior and other issues. We're only talking about the merits of this case. The lawyers making this case should have their arguments taken at face value without broader geopolitical allegiances of the countries they represent, weighing or biasing them.
As they engage in the destruction of Palestinians and the physical infrastructure of Gaza. We show this third element next. Israel's special genocidal intent is rooted in the belief that, in fact, the enemy is not just the military wing of Hamas, or indeed Hamas generally, but is embedded in the fabric of Palestinian life in Gaza. On 7 October, in a televised address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war on Gaza, and I quote, "Israel had started clearing out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists." And he warned of an unprecedented price to be paid by the enemy. There are more than 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. Israel is the occupying power in control of Gaza. It controls entry, exit, and the internal movements of inside Gaza. And Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu exercises overall command over the Israeli Defense Force and, in turn, the Palestinians in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his address to the Israeli forces on 28 October 2023, preparing for the invasion of Gaza, urged the soldiers to remember what Amalek has done to you. This refers to the biblical command by God to Saul for the retaliatory destruction of an entire group of people known as the Amalekites, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. The genocidal invocation to Amalek was anything but idle. It was repeated by Mr. Netanyahu in a letter to the Israeli Armed Forces on 3 November 2023. Madam President, let the Prime Minister's words speak for themselves.
Has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember and we are fighting our brave troops and combatants who are now in Gaza or around Gaza. And
a big university professor trying to work out the PowerPoint vibes. For real, this shit happens all the time in high-level, like Supreme Court, high-level court hearings. Like, this happens all the time. First day on Zoom shit. It's very, very common. It's literally just boomer tech shit. It's just it's a feature of life.
The Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, has called for the erasure of the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. The Defense Force agrees. On 9 October, the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, gave a situation update to the army, where he said that as Israel was imposing a complete siege on Gaza, there would be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. everything would be closed because Israel is fighting human animals. Speaking to troops on the Gaza border, he instructed them that he has released all the restraints and that Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. We will reach all places. Eliminate everything. Reach all places without any restraints. The theme of destruction of human animals was reiterated by an Israeli army coordinator of government activities in the territories on 9 October 2023, who, in an address to Hamas and the residents of Gaza, stated that Hamas has become ISIS and that the citizens of Gaza are celebrating instead of being horrified. He concluded that human animals are dealt with accordingly. Israel has imposed a total blockade on Gaza. No electricity, no water, just damage. You wanted hell, you will get hell. The language of systematic dehumanization is evident here. Human animals. Both Hamas and civilians are condemned. Within the Israeli cabinet, this is also a widely held view. The Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, Israel Katz, called for the denial of water and fuel, as this is what will happen to a people of children killers and slaughterers. This admits of no ambiguity. It means to create conditions of death of the Palestinian people in Gaza. To die a slow death because of starvation and dehydration, or to die quickly because of a bomb attack or snipers, but to die nevertheless. In fact, Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu said that Israel must find ways for Gazans that are more painful than death. It is no answer to say that neither are in command of the army. They are ministers in the Israeli government. They vote in the Knesset and are in a position to shape state policy. The intent to destroy Gaza has been nurtured at the highest levels of state, as President Isaac Herzog has joined the ranks of those signing bombs destined for Gaza. Having previously noted that the entire population in Gaza is responsible and that this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved is absolutely not true, we will fight until we break their backbone. Later attempts by the President and others to neutralize this speech have not altered the sting of his words, which was to tar all Palestinians as responsible for the actions of Hamas. Nor, as I will show below, has it affected how state policy is understood within government. The Minister of National Security repeated the President's statements that Hamas and civilians are responsible in equal measure. On 10 November 2023, in a televised interview, he stated that when we say that Hamas should be destroyed, it also means those who celebrate, those who support, and those who hand out candy. They are all terrorists, and they should also be destroyed. These are orders to destroy and to maim what cannot be destroyed. These statements are not open to neutral interpretations or after-the-fact rationalizations and reinterpretations by Israel. The statements were made by persons in command of the state. They communicated state policy. It is simple. If the statements were not intended, they would not have been made. The genocidal intent behind these statements is not ambiguous to the Israeli soldiers on the ground.
This is a point that I've made many times before as a kind of dash of hopium through all of this, but I do think it's worth pointing out that this is what I mean about fascism being innately self-destructive. It is in Israel's best interest to not say stuff like this. If they wanted to quietly get rid of the Palestinian people without losing that much international renown, there are absolutely better ways to have done it, like easily, at least rhetorically. But they can't do it because fascists are too high on their own supply, too full of zealous fervor. They they have no self-control, and ultimately it works against their interest.
Indeed, it is directing their actions and objectives. On 7 December 2023, Israeli soldiers proved that they understood the Prime Minister's message to remember what the Amalek has done to you as genocidal. They were recorded by journalists dancing and singing. We know our motto, there are no uninvolved, that they obey one commandment, to wipe off the seed of Amalek. The Prime Minister's invocation of Amalek is being used by soldiers to justify the killing of civilians, including children. These are the soldiers repeating the inciting words of their Prime Minister. Israeli soldiers.
As IDF, as your lawyer, I am advising you to keep posting this shit, please. Please continue with your songs and dances. Upload them to TikTok. It really is also like a condemnation of the zealotry and the higher levels of the IDF, because I'm pretty sure if like what was the thing we did in Iraq? Abu Ghraib? I forget how it's pronounced. When the people were torturing, did I pronounce it correctly? All those photos you've seen of the people who were being tortured, made to pose in certain ways. This would be like if that happened every single week, it wasn't a controversy or a scandal. You know, like I'm pretty sure that if like 50 U.S. soldiers were doing a song and a dance about how they were going to slaughter civilians and occupy foreign land, and that got posted online, they would all be beaten to death by their CO. Maybe I'm overstating American military discipline here, but I know for a fact this shit does not happen to other countries the way it happens with Israel. Even Russian soldiers, I think, are relatively disciplined. Like, Russian soldiers will rip and loot and pillage, but Jesus, it's like a coordinated campaign to put all the worst shit out there, you know? Like, maybe it's just because the Russian people are uploading it in Russian, so, like, we're not seeing as much of it. But I feel like it'd be, like, every single day. You can just go on IDF TikTok, and they're all just so brazen, you know? There's some allowance of it in American military, but some COs would just drop you in a river. Yeah, it just... I'm thinking it might be bad strategy for the genocidal fascists who are relying on support from liberal nations to keep posting videos about how they're genocidal fascists, you know? Yeah, US military TikToks are about them dressing up as women and kissing each other, you know? That's what soldiers should be posting on TikTok. That's normal, that's fine, that's healthy. They should do that, you know?
In Gaza were filmed dancing, chanting, and singing in November. May their village burn, may Gaza be erased. There is now a trend among the soldiers to film themselves committing atrocities against civilians in Gaza in a form of snuff video. One recorded himself detonating over 50 houses.
I saw that.
In Shujaiya. Other soldiers were recorded singing, "We will destroy all of Khan Yunis and this house. We will blow it up for you and for everything you do for us." These are the soldiers putting into effect their command.
The world's most moral military.
The commanders of the army are also of the same mind. Israeli army commander Yair Ben David has stated that the army had done in Beit Hanon and did there as Shimon and Levi did in Nablus, and that the entire Gaza should resemble Beit Hanon. Israeli soldier Yeshai Shalev published a video against the backdrop of the ruins of what was the site of Al-Azhar University with the caption, "Once upon a time, there was a university in Gaza, and in practice, a school for murderers and human animals." Soldiers obviously believe that this language and their actions are acceptable because the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza is articulated state policy. Senior political and military officials encouraged without censure the 95-year-old Israeli army reservist Ezra Yachin, a veteran of the Deir Yassin massacre against the Palestinians in 1948, to speak to the soldiers ahead of the ground invasion in Gaza. In his tour, he echoed the same sentiment while being driven around in an officially Israeli army vehicle dressed in Israeli army fatigue. I quote, "Be triumphant and finish them off, and don't leave anyone behind. Erase the memory of them. Erase them, their families, mothers, and children. These animals can no longer live. If you have an Arab neighbor, don't wait, go to his home and shoot him. We want to invade, not like before. We want to enter and destroy what's in front of us, and destroy houses, then destroy the one after it. With all of our forces, complete destruction, enter and destroy. As you can see, we will witness things we've never dreamed of. Let them drop bombs on them and erase them." As recently as 7 January 2024, a video of a soldier was posted online where he boasts that the army had destroyed the entire village of Hibat Azar. For 2 weeks, he said, they had worked hard to bomb the village and executed their mandate. Any suggestion that senior politicians did not mean what they said, much less that the meaning was not understood by soldiers in Gaza, would be without any merit. The scale of destruction in Gaza, the mass targeting of family homes and civilians, the war being a war on children, all make clear that genocidal intent is both understood and is being put into practice. The articulated intent is the destruction of Palestinian life in all its manifestations. The genocidal rhetoric is also commonplace within the Israeli Knesset. Members of the Knesset have repeatedly called for Gaza to be wiped out, flattened, erased, and crushed on all its inhabitants. They have deplored anyone feeling sorry for the uninvolved Gazans, asserting repeatedly that there are no uninvolved, that there are no innocents in Gaza, that the killers of the women and children should not be separated from the citizens of Gaza, and that the children of Gaza have brought this upon themselves, and that there should be one sentence for everyone there, death. Finally, the lawmakers have called for mercilessly bombing from the air, with some advocating for the use of nuclear doomsday weapons, and a Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 48. The Prime Minister's genocidal speech has gained ground among some elements of civil society. A famous singer has repeated Mr. Netanyahu's Amalek reference, stating that Gaza must be wiped out and be destroyed with every Amalek seed. We simply must destroy all of Gaza and exterminate everyone who is there. Another has called to erase Gaza, not leave a single person there. Journalists and commentators have announced that the woman is an enemy, the baby is an enemy, the pregnant woman is an enemy. That it is necessary to turn the strip into a slaughterhouse, to demolish every house our soldiers come across, exterminate everyone. The intentional failure of the government of Israel to...
Chad, it's always worth remembering that the IDF arose from a combination of right-wing militias, the Ergon, Hagan, and Lehi. Yeah, the funny thing is that, like, the IDF basically is, like, the Azov battalion. It's the same situation, kind of. Back after the UN mandate, when the fighting really started breaking out, like, there were already a lot of Zionist militias on the ground. A lot of them were sane, like far-right or terrorist group or ethnonat or whatever. So, like, the IDF kind of grew out of an initial amalgam of, yeah, same shit. Very funny. I mean, hey, one of the groups that kind of like, yeah, the Likud was literally like pro-Nazi for a while.
Condemn, prevent, and punish such genocidal incitement constitutes in itself a grave violation of the Genocide Convention. We should recall, Madam President, that in Article 1 of the Convention, Israel confirmed that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law. And it undertook to prevent and to punish it as such. This failure to prevent, condemn, and punish such speech by the government has served to normalize genocidal rhetoric and extreme danger for Palestinians within Israeli society. As MK Moshe Sada from the Likud party has said, the government's own attorneys share his views that...
Lehi, not Likud? Sorry, Lehi. I knew it started with an L. Let me double check. Lehi Israel. Group. It's the guy, that very old guy. Yeah, Lehi, not Likud. Sorry. These guys. Known pejoratively as the Stern Gang, Zionist paramilitary militia organization, did terrorism stuff. Lehi split from the Ergun militant group in 1940 in order to continue fighting the British during World War II. It initially sought an alliance with fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. This was during the time that their people were being liquidated in concentration camps. Like the camps were a-rolling at this time, and they were like, yep, twice tried to ally with the Nazis, then try to go to the Soviets. National Bolshevism, considered an amalgam of both right and left. Regarding themselves as revolutionary socialists. Were they actually socialists? No, of course not, but you know. Jointly responsible for the Deir Yassin massacre of 107 villagers. Ah, well, having fun again, aren't we?
Palestinians in Gaza must be destroyed. I quote, "You go anywhere, and they tell you to destroy them."
Oh yeah, that you probably saw some videos of that, like, super old dude in Israel who was, like, gunning up the troops. That guy belonged to Lehi. He was with the Stern Gang.
In the kibbutz, they tell you to destroy them. My friends at the state attorney's office who fought with me on political issues in debate said to me, it is clear that we need to destroy all Gazans. Destroy all Gazans. Israel is aware of its destruction of Palestinian life and infrastructure. Despite this knowledge, it has maintained and indeed intensified its military activity in Gaza. As to full awareness, in the week after 7 October, NGOs and the United Nations warned of an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The UN stated that actors must allow humanitarian teams and goods to immediately and safely reach the hundreds of thousands of people in need. So right from the beginning, Israel knew that it was depriving water, food, electricity, and essentials for survival. It said so. Everything is closed. It has known that it was depriving Palestinians of health care and treatment for injury in the middle of an unprecedented bombardment, of food and water, and of other essentials for survival. This prompted the World Health Organization to say, we are on our knees asking for sustained, scaled-up, protected humanitarian operations, appealing to all those in a situation to make a decision or influence decision makers to give us the humanitarian space to address this human catastrophe. Despite this knowledge, Israel continues to target infrastructure essential for survival: water and sanitation infrastructure, solar panels, bakeries, mills, crops. It bombs hospitals, decimating the healthcare system. It targets aid workers and the infrastructure of the United Nations. It is because of the policy of Israel that Gaza has become a place of death and despair. In conclusion, Madam President, many propagators of grave atrocities have protested that they were misunderstood, that they did not mean what they said, and that their own words were taken out of context.
I know that one.
What state would admit to a genocidal intent? Yet, the distinctive feature of this case has not been the silence as such, but the reiteration and repetition of genocidal speech throughout every sphere of state in Israel.
I'm very sorry. There are people in chat who have speculated as to how Israel could possibly respond to all of this, and I want you all to know that following this, the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs describes South Africa as functioning as the legal arm of Hamas. So, in case you are wondering what, like, phenomenal, like, national defense they would mount, to protect themselves, I wouldn't hold your breath on one. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Israel's foreign ministry, yep, functioning as the legal arm of the Hamas terrorist organization. And the Biden administration said the genocide allegations were unfounded, in case you were wondering whether or not we were also an evil country.
We remind the court of the identity and authority of the genocidal inciters: the Prime Minister, the President, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of National Security, the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, members of the Knesset, senior army officials, and foot soldiers. Genocidal utterances are therefore not out in the fringes. They are embodied in state policy.
Do you guys want to know what the actual counter-argument is going to be from the Israeli legal team led by Malcolm Shaw? Okay? They're unironically going to do a procedural, like, oh no, you don't have the authority. This is the paragraph summarizing their 3-hour segment from the UN. The Israeli legal team, led by British jurist Malcolm Shaw, argued Israel did not possess the, quote, special intent required for the crime of genocide. Shaw contended that the South African case provided only a partial narrative and asserted the UN's highest court lacked jurisdiction over the Gaza war. What? It is the International Court of Justice. What on earth do you mean? A matter awaiting the judge's response. I look forward to the judges of the International Court of Justice responding to the claim that they lack jurisdiction from the moon war that Israel is apparently waging against Hamas. According to Haaretz, what allowed South Africa to present their case was not the actual events of the war, but instead incendiary comments made by certain members of the current Israeli government coalition. So apparently Haaretz is making the argument, leaving aside the fact that this is a lie and plenty of the actual events of the war are being referred to here, they're essentially saying that with regards to whether or not a country is committing genocide, comments made by the leaders of the country aren't relevant. But they're also saying that it wasn't proven that Israel has special intent. So how could you possibly prove a country has intent to commit genocide while also saying there's no legitimacy to using the comments made by the leaders of that government when making that claim? Completely incoherent. Shaw invited the court to consider the decisions of the Israeli cabinets instead of focusing on, quote, random statements by politicians who are not decision makers. Guys, it's just the leaders of our country making constant statements. Just random little. I'm just a little birthday boy. Netanyahu's just a little birthday boy. He's not a decision maker. You know, what are you talking about? So yeah, no, Israel is not going to mount a convincing counter argument to this. We're not going to have time to get to Israel's bit today. We will, I guess, next stream. Oh man, that's a long one. Yeah, we will next stream, but I wouldn't hold your breath. You know, I wouldn't hope for a very convincing rebuttal. I gotta say. Ah, this is the one with the wig.
The intent to destroy is plainly understood by soldiers on the ground. It is also fully understood by some within the Israeli society, with the government facing criticism for allowing in any aid to Gaza on the basis that it is recanting on its promise to starve Palestinians. Any suggestion that Israeli officials did not mean what they said or were not fully understood by soldiers and civilians alike to mean what they said should be rejected by this court. The evidence of genocidal intent is not only chilling, it is also overwhelming and incontrovertible. Madam President, it is now my honor to request you to call Mr. John Dugard on the subject of jurisdiction.
I thank Mr. Ngukai Toby, and I now invite Professor John Dugard to take the floor. You have the floor, Professor.
Oh, wait, it was the born in the streets at the ICJ drip guy. Ah, hello.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is a great privilege to appear before you today on behalf of the Republic of South Africa.
The most British man in existence.
In my speech, I will address the question of jurisdiction. The people of South Africa and of Israel both have a history of suffering. Both states have become parties to the Genocide Convention in the determination to end suffering. In this spirit, neither has attached a reservation to Article 9 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is in terms of this convention dedicated to saving humanity that South Africa brings this dispute before the court. The prohibition on genocide is a peremptory norm. Obligations under the Genocide Convention are erga omnes, obligations owed to the international community as a whole. States parties to this convention are obliged not only to desist from genocidal acts, but also to prevent them. That the obligation of state parties to prevent acts of genocide is the foundation of the convention is clear from its placement in Article 1 of the convention. Article 9 of the Genocide...
Did this guy fight in the Boer War? Yeah, I don't know. Oh, man. Hold on. Okay, they take a pause here, and this person, and then the wig, and this. I'm just wondering what I should do with regards to time. I know that the remainder of this video, as we continue to go forward, we're going to see mostly like echoes and reiterations of what we've already seen. The fundamental argument has been laid. It's just a matter of the whole legal team going forward. I am running out of time, though. So, I mean, if we did this, and then we did a stream where we watched, like, the rest of this, but that would feel like a repeat of the first stream. I wonder. I think I'll have to decide. But I also don't know if I want to end watching this on him. Oh, I see. Okay. Actually, the interim, or the break in the middle is relatively soon. So that's actually a pretty good stopping point.
Convention makes it clear that state parties are guardians of the Genocide Convention. Unlike other treaties designed to protect human rights, it does not oblige states to pursue negotiations as a prelude to approaching this court. It does not treat the ending of genocidal acts as a bilateral affair between states. Instead, it envisages a situation in which a state, acting on behalf of the international community as a whole, seizes the jurisdiction of the court as a matter of urgency to prevent genocide. South Africa has a long history of close relations with Israel. For this reason, it did not bring the dispute immediately to the attention of the court. It watched with horror as Israel responded to the terrible atrocities committed against its people on 7 October, with an attack on Gaza that resulted in the indiscriminate killing of innocent Palestinian civilians, most of whom were women and children. The South African government repeatedly voiced its concerns in the Security Council and in public statements that Israel's actions had become genocidal. On 10 November, in a formal diplomatic démarche, it informed Israel that while it condemned the actions of Hamas, it wanted the International Criminal Court to investigate the leadership of Israel for international crimes, including genocide. As the court will know, the definition of genocide in the Rome Statute repeats that of the Genocide Convention. On 17 October, South Africa referred Israel's commission of the crime of genocide to the International Criminal Court for, quote, vigorous investigation, unquote. In announcing this decision, President Ramaphosa publicly expressed his abhorrence for what is happening right now in Gaza, which is now turned into a concentration camp where genocide is taking place. To accuse a state of committing acts of genocide and to condemn it in such strong language is a major act on the part of a state. At this stage, it became clear that there was a serious dispute between South Africa and Israel, which would end only with the end of Israel's genocidal acts. South Africa repeated this accusation at a meeting of BRICS on 21 November and at an emergency special session of the United Nations General Assembly on 12 December. No response from Israel was forthcoming. None was necessary. By this time, the dispute had crystallized as a matter of law. This was confirmed by Israel's official and unequivocal denial on 6 December that it was committing genocide in Gaza. However, as a matter of courtesy, before filing the present application, on 21 December, South Africa sent a note verbal to the Embassy of Israel to reiterate its view that Israel's acts of genocide in Gaza amounted to genocide, that it, as a state party to the Genocide Convention, was under an obligation to prevent genocide from being committed. Israel responded by way of a note verbal that failed to address the issues raised by South Africa in its note and neither affirmed nor denied the existence of a dispute. This was emailed later on the 27th of December. This note was received by the relevant South African team on the 29th of December after the present application was filed. On 4 January, South Africa replied to this note verbal, highlighting Israel's failure to prevent any response to the matters raised by South Africa over the previous months, as reiterated in its note verbal. South Africa made it clear that given Israel's ongoing conduct against Palestinians in Gaza, the dispute referred to in its note verbal of 21 December remained unresolved and was plainly not capable of resolution by way of a bilateral meeting. Nevertheless, South Africa proposed a meeting on 5 January, again out of courtesy. Israel responded to this note verbal by proposing that we reconnect to coordinate a meeting at the earliest opportunity after the close of hearings in the present case. To this, South Africa understandably replied that such a meeting would serve no purpose. Madam President, these notes verbal are all to be found in the judge's folder. The existence of a dispute is a matter to be determined by an objective determination of the facts as they existed at the time of the filing of the application. At this time, South Africa had already accused Israel in the Security Council, the General Assembly, and other public fora of engaging in genocidal acts. It had conducted a diplomatic démarche on Israel, warning it.
This guy is hated by the ADL. The ADL is first and foremost a Zionist organization. They have no interest whatsoever in combating anti-Semitism. They have praised and worked with essentially open anti-Semites as long as it supports the interests of the Israeli state. The ADL is a horrible resource and is itself like a supporter of a hate movement.
That it viewed its conduct as genocidal. It had requested the International Criminal Court to vigorously investigate crimes under the Genocide Convention committed by Israel in the Gaza Strip, and it accused Israel inter alia of the deliberate targeting of civilians, intentionally causing starvation and impeding relief supplies. It had accused Israel leaders of expressing, quote, the intent of committing genocide. Israel had flatly denied South Africa's accusations. Despite these harsh accusations, Israel has persisted in its genocidal acts against the population of Gaza. What more evidence could be required to establish a dispute? It is precisely because of a situation of this kind, affecting the international community as a whole, that Article 9 of the Genocide Convention does not require negotiations as a precondition to seizing the jurisdiction of the court. Certainly, a respondent state cannot prevent a referral to the court by claiming that there is no dispute and that it wants discussions on this matter when the existence of the dispute is clear. For a state to insist on a time frame for negotiations would simply be a license to commit genocide and would run counter to the object and purpose of the Genocide Convention. Madam President, the question of the crystallization of a dispute has been addressed by this court in preliminary objections at the merits stage where the burden of proof is higher. Although the court has generally adopted a flexible approach to the subject, it has laid down a number of tests for the existence of a dispute. First, it must be shown that the claim of one party is positively opposed by the other. Second, the date for determining the existence of the dispute is the date of the application, but subsequent conduct may be considered. 3, whether the dispute exists must be determined by an objective determination of the facts. And 4, a dispute exists when it is demonstrated on the basis of the evidence that the respondent was aware or could not have been unaware that its views were positively opposed. When these propositions are applied to the facts of this case, it is incontrovertible that a dispute exists between South Africa and Israel. South Africa strongly believes that what Israel is doing in Gaza amounts to genocide. Israel denies this and claims that such an accusation is legally and factually wrong and, moreover, is obscene. So an objective determination of the facts shows that a dispute existed on the date of the submission of South Africa's application, and this has been confirmed by Israel's subsequent statements and by its continuing conduct in Gaza. Moreover, Israel must have been aware from South Africa's public statements, the démarche, and the referral of the matter to the International Criminal Court of Israel's genocidal acts that a dispute existed between the two states. Madam President, the court has indicated that in an application...
Why is he so out of breath? Because he's 500 years old.
...for provisional measures, it is sufficient to show that there is a prima facie basis for jurisdiction. It is submitted that South Africa has convincingly established the existence of a dispute between it and Israel over the fulfillment of the latter's obligations under the Genocide Convention. Finally, it is submitted that regard should be had to the special considerations that apply to the existence of a dispute under Article 9 of the Genocide Convention between a state that brings an application in furtherance of its obligation to prevent genocide and a state accused of committing genocide. This concludes my speech, Madam President. I thank you, the members of the court, for your attention. I now ask you to call to the podium Professor Max du Plessis to address you on the nature of the rights requiring protection and the link between such rights and the measures requested. Thank you.
I thank you, Professor Dugard. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, the court will observe a coffee break of 10 minutes. Sitting is...
Coffee break? Well, don't mind if I do. I don't know if we're going to see the second half of this because I feel like the fundamental argument's been made. I do want to look at the Israeli defense, of which was made the following day, so we can, I don't know, get angry at it together. Because this is still going on, there's not much in the way of legal analysis. There isn't that much like information that's been collected on it. You know, we're looking at history happening live. There's an analysis section on the Wikipedia page. You know, a bunch of people have been talking about it. I guess we'll take a look at that. Lawfare, a blog affiliated with the Brookings Institute, likened South Africa's application to proceedings instituted by the Gambia and Myanmar. Yeah, we took a look at that. Now, it's South Africa's invocation of erga omnes partes, a doctrine of legal standing which, quote, allows a state party to a treaty protecting common legal rights to enforce those rights even if the state is not directly affected by the violation. Well, the Gambia wasn't affected by Myanmar's Rohingya genocide, but they still brought the case. Doesn't that settle it right there? If the argument is, bro, you can't file this case, you're not involved, then why was the Gambia able to successfully charge Myanmar with genocide? The genocide wasn't against the Gambia, you know? So yeah, it's like settled. It's jurisprudence. You know, Israel's just wasting time. It's international court. Hakim and Hathaway state the Rohingya genocide case revolutionized the doctrine of erga omnes. They concluded that it was highly likely the court will find South Africa has standing to institute the proceedings. Yeah. They also stated that establishing genocidal intent is extraordinarily challenging. That is true. Professor Luciano Pisano, writing in the blog of the European Journal of International Law, argues that invoking Article 9 of the Genocide Convention is a means by which uninvolved states can fulfill their obligation to prevent genocide. Yeah. David Sheffer, a U.S. State Department official who looks like this, criticized South Africa's case for its, quote, complete lack of recognition that Israel is at war. Ah, we forgot. Thank you. Thank you for my... Oh, man, is that true? Oh, man, that's crazy. Thank you. Thank you. And failure to acknowledge that any Palestinian civilian deaths are the result of a military action against an enemy which Israel has a justifiable right to attack in self-defense. Oh, man. Thank you. Thank you. That's true. No genocides have ever happened during wars. That's so true. Famously. Yeah, Sherlock Sponge. Yeah, that's so true. Sheffer explained that the genocidal nature of Hamas's precipitating October 7th attack, coupled with Israel's extensive and persistent effort to mitigate civilian deaths in the face of Hamas's illegal use of human shields, made it clearly a line too far to argue Israel actually has the intent to commit genocide when Israel is responding to a genocidal act in order to prevent further genocide against Israel. The argument that what Hamas did is genocidal is so fundamentally unserious to begin with, and then to look at all of that testimony brought forward of people in Israel from every level of government and military saying, yeah, we're doing a genocide, and then to go like, no intent has been established, demonic. I do like, by the way, how in favor of South America's case, we see a bunch of people who are like lawyers, you know, like Lawfare, a blog associated with the Brookings Institution, Al-Hakem Professor Una A. Hathaway, Hakem Hathaway State, and then over here, Professor Lucian Pisano. And then for the pro-Israel side, we have a U.S. ambassador at large for war crimes issue. You know, we have a U.S. like government official for Bill Clinton's second term of office. Like, I'm sure this guy has a legal history, but it is funny that the guy they got for the defending side is like literally a former U.S. government official. He looks like a 21 Jump Street villain. True. States and international organizations supporting South Africa over here. And then in opposition, we have the axis of evil. Austria and Germany, the Czech Republic, Guatemala, don't know what their deal is, Hungary, fascist, Israel, double fascist, the United States, evil, the United Kingdom, dying and evil. The U.S. is itself being sued for complicity in genocide in domestic legal proceedings. U.S. National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby said the U.S. found the submission meritless, counterproductive, and completely without any basis in fact. Antony Blinken called the genocide accusation against Israel meritless. Thanks, guys. Why are we evil? You know, I don't know. It'd be nice if we weren't.